anything technical nowadays, go to generative AI and make it easier to understand. I mean, we have to get comfortable with the fact that these tools are supplemental to us. They empower us. So at any time I come across something that doesn't make any sense to me, forget Google, go to generative AI, go to Perplexity. It's one of my favorite tools. Go to Perplexity and get output that not only makes sense for you, but refers to the specific source data from which, the source resource from which the data came.
Hey everyone, thank you very much for listening to this episode of the Audit Podcast. Whatever platform you're listening on right now, I'm sure there's a subscribe button somewhere, so please hit the subscribe button there. If you're listening through iTunes or Spotify, feel free to go give us that 5-star rating. It only took me about 16 seconds to give myself a 5-star review, and it really helps to get future guests to come on the show, so we'd really appreciate that. Lastly, be sure to check out the show notes and follow us on all our social media channels on Instagram, on LinkedIn, and on TikTok. Also, if interested, please sign up for our weekly newsletter from the Audit Podcast. Thank you all. Have a great one. What is in either your browsing history or your ChatGPT, your Llama, your Claude, whatever your LLM of choice is? And for you, it might even be, well, I use this LLM for this, and this one for this, and this one for this. So which way do you want me to go? But I'll leave it to you. What's in your history there? What have you been looking into as of late?
Well, this might disappoint you a little bit because I don't think it'll involve any AI, or at least not the AI applications, the ChatGPTs of the world. But I'm a hobbyist investor in stocks, and I have a stock portfolio that I keep up with. So I go to cnbc.com way too many times per day. So they're learning about, is there anything new with Amazon or Alphabet, which I own? Is there anything new in terms of AI? What's the latest job reports, CPI number, the economy, inflation? So I like to stay connected to how the economy is heading, how my companies are doing, and how competitors are operating. And I know this won't shock you, which ties to our discussion. There's always at least a few articles about AI every single day.
Yeah, it is unavoidable at this point. There was a podcast I listened to. It's not appropriate for children at all, so I do not recommend listening to it. And please, if you've never listened to it and you listen to it, please don't judge me because it's very crude humor, but it's called Two Bears, One Cave. It's just two comedians who talk unfiltered, I'll add. And it was either today's or last week's episode, but I was listening to it today, and the host, one of the hosts got on. He was like, "Did you know you could do this with ChatGPT?" Or like, "I didn't know AI could do this." And so like, it's still, even in this world of like these two comedians who just had this buddy podcast and just they talk about whatever pops in their brain, that was one of the topics of conversation. So it is everywhere.
It's a hot topic. It's hard to ignore it.
Other question real quick. How do you feel about emojis in emails? Are you for them or against them?
Oh, this is an interesting question. So the answer is it depends. How's that? I am 100% for them if you know the audience and the generation of the audience. If you don't know the receiver, then I avoid them like the plague. But if you have a connection already, absolutely, go to town. Yeah.
Somebody pointed out recently that because you mentioned the generations, there's some things that an emoji means that I don't know that that's what it means, and so they're like, let's stick with like a generic smiley face, sad face, and that's about it. Anything else, I feel like, what does that really mean to the other generation? So, all right,
you have to know your audience, and although this is not an emoji issue, but I remember years ago, somebody that I worked with would email me in all caps. And my reaction was, all caps means yelling, right? I called him. I was like, "Hey, is everything okay?" That's just, he was an older gentleman, so that's how he chose to write his email. So, yeah, depends on the audience.
Yeah, I still judge people who do two space bars after a period or a exclamation point or something.
As in, if they don't have the two spaces, they're in the naughty list. What do you mean? What's the judgment?
So, like that's how it was taught to older generation, is you hit period, you type your sentence, you hit period, and then you space bar 2 times. And I don't know where that came from, but that is a generational thing. I think a lot of people have kind of gotten out of it, but I know I worked with somebody and it was always the 2 space bar after the period. It just drove me nuts for whatever reason. So, all right, let's get to the topics at hand. So we're talking responsible AI governance overall as a topic. And just to kind of set it up from my perspective and then to get yours, And the main reason I'm doing this, and I think the audience knows, usually I just kind of ask questions, give a sentence or two, and that's it. I try not to do a lot of talking. That's why we have folks like yourself on. But we're working with a group, internal audit group, and they said, we want AI governance review. We have some stuff in place, but we really need to like bolster this thing up. And you can't make it bulletproof, but bolster it up. And so we had the kickoff for that recently. Hats off to Roberto, if you're listening. And the CAE, I said, hey, I want you to kind of introduce this to the rest of the stakeholders and say why you want it, why we are having this project. It means a lot more coming from you than it does from, a third party, me and the third party. And I thought he said it really well. It's not hey, we're in audit and we want to have this AI governance process in place to mitigate risks. Of course, that's a big piece of it, but he spoke more to the opportunity and said, if a new AI solution comes out, we want to be in a position to where we can implement it relatively quickly without having to go through, should we, could we, and just have a framework to follow so that they basically create a competitive advantage for themselves. And I thought that was such a well understood perspective of AI governance, and that, especially from the audit side where we talk about risk all the time, but more so, we want this in place so that we can take advantage of the opportunities when they get here. Because if you think about and Julio, I'm sure you've heard these stories also, like when ChatGPT really hit and companies just went, nope, block it, 100%, we're not going to touch it. Whereas if they had something in place, they could have, and obviously this was very early on with AI really getting out to the masses. And so I understood it then, but if you're still stuck with that, then you can't use some of these tools. Like what I would be frustrated as an employee, one, that I couldn't use them. Two, episodes like this, other, webinars where AI is a topic of interest, people are going to go, well, we can't really use it here. I'm not going to sign up for this if I can't use it. Potentially, I could see that being a barrier. And so now they're even further behind on adoption, which I think is a huge risk. So anyway, that's my spiel. I will limit the rest of my conversation. I feel like I've already talked more now than I do in almost any other episode. But talk to us about AI governance, responsible AI, and kind of maybe misconceptions as well.
So I love your commentary, and I think that those of us who embrace it the way you mentioned that gentleman embrace it, seeing the opportunity, are clearly going to outcompete everybody else. And I suspect that, generally speaking, whenever there's a lot of unknown in front of us, we tend to respond with fear and hesitation and unwillingness to embrace it, because that's not a shocking response. So it shouldn't be a surprise that initially, many people, probably a majority of people who heard about ChatGPT, that was probably their first time thinking about AI. And I suspect the majority of that majority, their only correlation with AI was probably the Terminator movies. So lots of fear in that brain analysis from neuron to neuron. So I can completely understand that. But I think you're absolutely spot on. We have to embrace AI and move forward accordingly, but do it responsibly. So that'll be your pivot to the discussion. Now, did you want to share something?
Yeah, I wanted to get into the topic a little bit more and just understand there are differences. And so there is as an organization, we are developing AI solutions, machine learning solutions, et cetera. And not everyone is there, because likely maybe you don't have a center of excellence with a team of data scientists and engineers and architects and the like. But nonetheless, AI is going to get introduced into your organization. So kind of a buy versus build, and any considerations that listeners need to take into consideration for that.
That's a great point. So let's lead on that, because that's exactly something I want to emphasize. So right off the bat, with all the AI we have in society today, in terms of the organizations that use or in any way are related to AI, we can break them down into two buckets. We have the builders, just like you just said, companies with machine learning engineers and data scientists. They build the technology. And then there's everybody else. We can call them the consumers. Responsible AI, which I'll define in a minute, tends to be mostly associated with the builders, but it applies to everybody equally. It's just about the perspective and the interpretation and the implementation. But let's define that. So first of all, AI governance is a huge umbrella. And in my view, responsible AI is a subset of that umbrella. So responsible AI can be defined as the development and deployment of an AI system in a way that it is ethical, that is safe, that is sound, that it aligns with your organization's values and, in theory, societal values, okay? So that's high-level definition. You can break the responsible AI area or component into different subparts. You might have heard of fairness and transparency and explainability. I would add privacy. I would add security. One interesting thing to point out about this is that there isn't, at least not to my knowledge, any universal guidance or standard that says, here's all the responsible AI components and the definitions. It differs in many places. Now, I've seen different companies publish their responsible AI principles on their website. So unsurprisingly, company X will differ a little bit from company Y. Of all the ones that I've looked at, the principles that I see most commonly are the first three that I mentioned: fairness, transparency, and explainability. And I'll define those in a minute. But data, privacy, and security make a lot of sense too. So in my mind, those are the five that should comprise responsible AI. And that's whether you're building the technology, for which this applies quite literally, or whether you are a consumer. And from your perspective, it's a vendor management issue, which we will definitely talk about. So, but let me ask you, I know you mentioned you weren't going to talk, but I got questions for you, Trent. So with all the people that you talk to, I mean, you have many episodes you've published, lots of very smart people, smarter than I'll ever be. You got the annual conference, the analytics and data, analytics and AI conference, your company, your analytics company, so many different conversations you've had over the last few years. How often does responsible AI come up for you? Or maybe even a few of these components that I mentioned?
Only in the sense of AI governance, but the term specifically responsible AI, I would say, has never been mentioned.
That's been my experience too, in the circles of internal audit and risk. Now, in the circles of AI, I hear it all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So this is why I think it's important to talk about it within our own people, within our own audit and risk community. So if you're the builder, that's absolutely relevant for you. Let's define the terms though. So fairness involves quite simply ensuring that the application that you deploy into the world does not discriminate against subgroups in a given population. In the world of banking, we have something called a prohibited basis group. These are groups of folks that we are legally not allowed to discriminate against in any way, shape, or form. Banks can discriminate on the basis of credit score. That's accepted. But gender, ethnicity, race, age, of course not. It's unacceptable, intentionally or unintentionally. So whenever you hear the term bias, that involves fairness. Fairness is about managing bias risk with any particular system. With transparency, it's about documentation and disclosure. So the people that build these technologies need to document the model. It's called a model card. There's also a data card. They have to document the things about the information pertaining to the data, testing procedures, the model, the algorithm, weights, and all these different pieces and puzzles of an AI model. Disclosure, an example of that is let's say you as a user are interacting with a chatbot with a bank, and that chatbot is AI powered, but it's indistinguishable from a human. Well, it will be responsible for the bank to disclose to the user you are about to use an AI powered application, right? So transparency is about disclosure and about documentation. Explainability is an interesting one, and it's a tricky one, and people are working on solving this problem. Explainability involves understanding how the model got to the outcome that it achieved, the prediction that it made. Yeah, it's a tough issue, and it's people are continuing to work on it because society is using very complex models, and that's when it becomes a bigger issue. So for example, if a company uses an AI system to review, say, 1,000 job applicants, and the purpose of that application is to identify which applicants are best suited for the role, and the app makes a prediction or recommendation for out of the 1,000, let's say 20, are filtered, and the 20 then moves to the next stage in the job application process, i.e. the interview. Well, what if that 20 is mostly men? And out of that men, it's mostly white men. Maybe they are the most qualified, or maybe that model is possibly dealing with some bias issues. But if the model is overly complex, it may be difficult to tell how the logic, if you will, inside of that model that led to that particular outcome. So that is a challenge to exactly just like you said, it's a challenge that's relevant today. People are working on it. I know that researchers, folks that are in university researching AI, ML, data science, they're working on this specific problem for sure. But it's important for us to know on the audit side what companies are doing today to try to manage this accordingly, because in my view, this will be helpful for those of us that are consumers. And the reason this is important is because I believe, this has been my stance for a long time, if you are evaluating risks and controls, you are going to be more effective as it relates to technology. You're going to be more effective if you have some reasonable reasonable understanding of the underlying technology. I'm not saying we should be PhDs in machine learning at all, but having some basic understanding of how people are developing these applications and what they do to manage risks as a part of that life cycle, that can be an asset to us from a vendor management perspective. Now, one thing I want to do is, it's not obvious to anybody listening or watching, but we have ChatGPT that's about to help on demand whenever we need it. And if you pay the $20 a month with OpenAI, you get access to the advanced voice feature, which is amazing. It's even more human-like than the free version. So it's up to you to pay. But I want to bring ChatGPT in the loop, and I want to ask you some questions. So bear with me here, okay? And if you cannot hear me, let me know. Hey, Chat. So I need your help. Within the context of responsible AI, which in my opinion is comprised of the following 5 components: transparency, fairness, explainability, privacy, and security. I want you to tell me, which of those components do you believe is the most critical in the short term and the most critical over the long term? And by long term, I define that as more than 10 years, and give me your answer in less than 30 seconds.
In the short term, transparency is the most critical. It builds trust and accountability. Over the long term, fairness becomes paramount, as it ensures AI systems benefit all parts of society equitably. Balancing these components is key to responsible AI development.
Thank you, Chad. That was 30 seconds. I love it.
Yeah.
So fairness and transparency. So everything it just said, I find interesting, and it sounds reasonable. Now, I say that to you because in the back of my mind, I know there's some proportion of with the output that was just given to us, that's a hallucination. Maybe it's less than 1%, maybe it's 1%, I don't know. But this is where I come in as a human and say, I'm going to override the AI system. And I agree with transparency being critical right now. But in my mind, I would think fairness is more critical right now because we are just now getting started with regulatory and legal compliance of AI. We're in the beginning stages of this. And I can imagine, based on all that I've learned so far, there will be a more compliance risk with fairness than with transparency. That's my own informed guess. Now, over the longer run, my gut tells me that security will probably overtake all the others. Because I can see fairness and transparency and explainability solved, because these are solvable problems. But with security, though, Trent, as you know, because we've talked about security before, security as a landscape is always evolving. The bad guys are always evolving. The attacks are always evolving. So I can see security, say, take 5 years from now, for sure 10, being a much critical issue with regard to AI than all the others.
There's a couple things I want to make sure you clarify for the audience who maybe they've been avoiding AI for whatever reason, maybe similar to what we talked about before, and that they're not really able to use it, but for whatever reason, like this is maybe their first kind of introduction to it to a degree. One, you mentioned hallucinations. So if you could spend 30 seconds, or maybe you can ask chat to spend 30 seconds to explain hallucinations, I think that might be helpful for some.
There's artificial general intelligence, which is hypothetical and is about AI that can handle a broad range of tasks. And then there's narrow AI, which is AI that can handle a somewhat narrow, defined range of tasks. And narrow AI is what we have in society today. And that narrow AI can be divided into 2 reasonable groups: predictive AI and generative AI. With predictive, these are the tools that we may not realize it, but we use them on a regular basis. So whenever you use Google Maps, that's predictive AI. Whenever you go to Netflix and you see movie recommendations, that's predictive AI. But we are all now familiar with ChatGPT, which falls under the other category of generative AI. And that's the type of AI that creates content that is text, images, video, audio, you name it. And as you guys know, there's many different kinds of Gen AI tools. There's Copilot with Microsoft. There is Claude with Anthropic. Meta, which runs Facebook, has their own large language model called Llama. It's open source, meaning it's publicly accessible. So that's an important distinction, generative versus predictive. So the hallucination commentary applies to generative AI. So whenever you use, we'll go with Copilot. Whenever you use Copilot and prompt it to create content for you, let's say you want to create an audit program in any particular area, there is a good chance, but a small chance, a small proportion of that output is going to be completely made up in the sense that it may not be factual. So if you're asking for factual output whenever you prompt a generative AI tool, there's a chance that a portion of that will be incorrect. And I'll give you a specific example. When ChatGPT 3.5 was released, I did a talk a few months after, and I prompted it to create a bio of me. And it said that I have a CPA, which I don't. And it said that I got my undergrad from the University of Puerto Rico, which I didn't, although that would have been really cool. But most of everything else was correct. So for anybody using these tools, you have to be a little professionally skeptical, always double check the information if you're making official decisions with it, but also know that the trend so far is that over time, they get better at having less and less hallucinations.
So this is what someone put it really well, or I like the way they put it the other day when they said, especially relative to audit, you would not just take like your intern or your staff and go, hey, go do this audit. And then whatever you find, like put it into the audit committee package and we'll be good to go. Like you wouldn't do that. Similarly, you shouldn't treat AI in the same way. So think of it as a staff or even an intern and go, whatever it gives me, I need to review it to make sure that it does align with, the way we do things around here, or the hallucination is taken into consideration during the review, basically. So don't think of it as ChatGPT is this PhD, auditor. Basically, think, okay, we're basically working with an intern here, and we need to review it as such. Okay,
that's a great point.
So I appreciate that.
No, I totally agree with you, because we have to just like we would leverage our folks responsibly by guiding them, giving them proper instructions, providing them good resources like training, guidance. It's almost the same with ChatGPT and other applications. So you can upload a file with any of these tools and provide and say, create content X for me, but only within the context of the file that I gave you. That's almost similar to saying to your employee, go to this IT audit seminar, and when you come back, you can begin doing the IT audit, right? You're giving them a source of data on which to train and then take further action.
All right, I want to bring it back to the security conversation, and because you mentioned the threat of that long term, and are you speaking more to we'll stick with ChatGPT and the security surrounding ChatGPT in terms of outsiders trying to basically penetrate ChatGPT, or are you talking about using AI to create more sophisticated or to more easily create cyber attacks for like the average person who might go, hey, how can I attack this system? Tell me how to use, AI. Tell me how to do that. Which bucket were you talking about?
All of them.
Okay.
All of them.
Which bucket? Yes.
Yeah. All the buckets. Yeah. Well, so you hit the nail on multiple heads there, multiple nails on the head. So clearly we have to responsibly use generative AI as it relates to the content we upload via this tool that goes from our computer through the untrusted network known as the internet all the way to OpenAI or Amazon or Claude or Anthropic servers. That's relevant. We also have to be aware that bad people can do what's called prompt injection attacks, which is a new variation of what was called a SQL injection, meaning bad guy will write a prompt, and depending on the prompt and the craftiness of the prompt could yield training data as a result of that prompt or other proprietary data. And I actually listened to a podcast a week ago or 2 weeks ago on AI where the researcher was explaining for the first time publicly this new attack variation that involved large language models, i.e. the ChatGPT of the world, that with prompts, with specific prompt crafting, he could somehow gain access to the first hidden layer of the model and the output layer of the model. Long story short, for really complex AI models, some of them can be neural networks, and they're organized by multiple vertical layers, and each vertical layer has different neurons, and think of them as little processors, and the data goes in from one layer to the next layer to the next layer. And that somewhat mirrors the brain, in that in our brain we have neurons with multiple dendrites or connections to other neurons. Well, he made the claim that using his techniques, he could get access to training data for specific layers of this model. And it just blew my mind. To our point, good people and bad people are going to evolve their techniques and learn about new ways to compromise these systems. So you have to take into account, to your point, our responsible use of the technology, the fact that you have bad people, you have attackers that are leveraging AI on a daily basis, including tools that we know like ChatGPT and Claude and Copilot to enhance their attacks, enhance their phishing attacks. That's going to continue to be an issue. What we don't think about often, though, is what about the companies that are hosting these systems? What about the training databases, the servers that are hosting the training data and the other data that overall is collectively supporting model development that bad guys can compromise and access? What about a back door that can be installed on a machine that is specifically used to support AI development? And the best way to put this into a little more context, and I'll probably stop here before we make this a show about security, because it could easily become one, is there's an organization called MITRE. And is that something you've come across, Trent, MITRE? So MITRE, M-I-T-R-E, they're known for the MITRE attack framework. And that framework is a truly mind-blowing document. It's a confusingly looking document that it's about tactics, techniques, and procedures for the various kind of attacks and how those attacks can be carried out. So the top row, the heading row, are the types of attacks. And each column, each sub-row below that are the variations of techniques that can be implemented for an attacker or a consultant. Yeah, that definitely works. I mean, so you can see right there, that is the MITRE attack framework for organizations to leverage. And the heading there shows different kinds of attacks, and then the specific procedures are broken down by row. As you can see, you guys, that is overwhelming. I mean, that is essentially the Bible for people to understand what kind of attacks are available and how to implement them. And as you click each particular link within each particular attack, you get much more information. Now, this is a very valuable resource for defenders, which is why it exists today. But it also provides the reader an idea, a visualization for how challenging it can be to manage cybersecurity risk. Well, there is an equivalent variation of this for AI specifically called the Atlas framework. And if you view that, it would be about half the size of this here. But I think invariably over time, it'll grow in size, it'll grow in number of techniques. And what a lot of us think about security and AI, we tend to think of two things. We think about applying inappropriate prompts into any Gen AI tool, and we think about bad guys using Gen AI inappropriately. But the truth is there's so much more than that. Now, in all fairness, a lot of the attacks that you see in the Atlas framework are sort of copy and paste from the original master MITRE attack framework, just repurposed for AI. But it's important for us to realize that just like today, ransomware, for example, is one of the greatest issues that people are facing from a cybersecurity perspective. It's not getting any easier. And there's a basic reason for that. I mean, I say basic, there's a fundamental reason that companies are just not mature enough from a cybersecurity perspective. And you can ask why that it is. That's a complicated discussion for another day. But those conditions haven't changed, Trent. What we have is conditions that remain the same that allow corporate society as a whole to be relatively vulnerable. And we have a technology that's advancing at a very rapid rate. So 3, 4, 5 years from now, not only will we have more AI in adoption, but we will have more autonomous AI in adoption. In a little bit, we might talk about agents that are becoming a thing now. So the capabilities for AI are clearly growing at a rate that we can't fathom, and the conditions for security vulnerabilities remain the same. So I feel like that's a very dangerous mix. So we have to be as proactive as possible at making security, top 3 in our list of issues.
I think one reason I like having you come on is you make the segue super easy because you just mentioned agents. And so now we can segue into basically emerging trends and the future. What a pro. All right. So, and this was, I believe, yesterday, Microsoft came out kind of with their agent announcement. And so I think it's starting to gain more traction. I think that fundamentally or foundationally, rather, that's where a lot of folks are going to kind of start with this, is with Copilot, because you're in a Microsoft environment and it's like, let's just go get the license and then we'll start figuring things out. So I could see Microsoft's agents kind of being where people start to see this a little bit more. But the idea of, and this is kind of where I see it potentially going, the idea of, hey, here's my kind of use case that I used ChatGPT to write the Python script to do this, but I absolutely hate having to schedule meetings. Mostly because I have to go, okay, historically I go, pull up my calendar on one screen, have the email on the other one. All right, 10:23. I'm available from 9 to 10, and then again from 10:30 to 11, and then again, and then have to do that multiple days so that to eliminate the amount of emails. And so we basically used, I'm on Gmail, and so we used Google's development environment to basically scrape my calendar and give me that, and then wrote a little Python script to basically take that output and clean it up so that it looks, significantly nicer. And so within about 2 clicks of a button, I can, copy and paste and go, here's my availability. We're good to go. And even then, it's just like, this is such a pain to have to do this. And so the idea, yeah. And especially if it's the agent going, as I'm clicking throughout the day and it going, hey man, you do this like 10 times a day. Would you like an agent to do this for you? And me to go, yes, please do that. And then be able to call that agent and basically go like, hey, give me my availability for the next week. And then it knows, like, even if the email's open, like put it into the open email wherever my cursor is, or depending on how detailed we can get with it. But basically for it to be able to track our day-to-day, especially the mundane things that we do, and it recommend, hey, do you want me to automate that thing for you? Yes, cool, let me do that for you. So that's kind of where agents, I see them as of maybe within the next 12, who knows? Like, who knows what we predict, especially with this stuff, the timeline anyway. It always seems to happen sooner than I would have ever imagined, but that's where I see it. I know Gartner came out recently with their kind of like 2025 trends. If you're not subscribed to Gartner and if nothing else, their trends in AI or analytics or any security, even following those is extremely helpful to kind of keep your finger on the pulse of what's going on. But they said, hey, number one AI topic you're going to be hearing about in 2025, agents. So with that said, that's my spiel on agents. I want to give the floor back to you, though. Give your spiel. What do you see as emerging trends coming up?
I agree. I subscribe to the YouTube channel, and every alert that comes up, I take a peek to see if it's something that I want to listen to. So that's a great recommendation. Oh, before I forget, I do want to close on one comment on our previous discussion. Since the majority of us are consumers, meaning we don't build the technology, take these responsible AI principles and make sure that they are incorporated into your vendor management due diligence process. So whatever you request of your vendor, make sure that you expect of them to abide by their responsible AI principles, best practice frameworks. So that's the key benefit from our end as consumers. Apply that to the vendor management process. So I wanted to throw that out there before I forget.
I think that's if there's no other takeaway today for people, I think that one is actionable. It's, Audit. Go take a look at what it takes to onboard a vendor, and then go talk to your TPRM or your vendor onboarding team. Consider opening up a separate audit for exactly what you just mentioned, Julio. I think that's fantastic. All right.
Vendor management audits should ensure that the program is adapting to the landscape. So so keep that in mind. So I love this discussion. And before we talk about agents, let me bring something up. You mentioned Gartner had a prediction for 2025, and unsurprisingly, lots of people have predictions for lots of things. And I've seen several of the AI builders like Inflection and Anthropic, and of course OpenAI and Microsoft. They have their own predictions about where we're heading over the next 5-10 years and so on. OpenAI came out recently with something they call the 5 stages to AGI. AGI, artificial general intelligence, and again, that's the type of AI that can broadly handle a broad range of cognitive tasks in different domains. It's the most human-like kind of AI system that we would have. Now, admittedly, the definition of AI changes from moment to moment because we already have passed the Turing test. I can talk to ChatGPT, the voice version, and feel comfortable with it. Imagine that I'm talking to a human. Check, box marked, right? So, but AGI is broadly capable. Now, their roadmap has 5 stages. The first one is chatbots. This is AI with conversational language. We hit that with ChatGPT 3.5. Stage 2 is reasoners. That is human level problem solving. We hit that recently this year with something called All-One Preview. If you're not familiar, ChatGPT has multiple models. It's one product with multiple models. And the latest model is now called All-One Preview for a while in the AI circle, it was called Project Strawberry. Whatever. Now it's out in the open. So O1 Preview is said to be comparable to that of a moderately capable PhD student in your pocket. And because it can do a lot of complex analysis, being used for scientific research, complex math, it's much better at math than its predecessors like 4.0 or 4. And part of the reason I understand is because, I mean, you and I have talked about prompt engineering, which is different styles of writing a prompt in these tools. And one of those prompt styles is chain of thought reasoning. The bottom line is the better the prompt that you write, the better output that you get. Well, supposedly O1 Preview already has chain of thought reasoning embedded already. So it requires less effort on our part, less prompting, and more, just leveraging the tool. So it's level 2 where they're now because of O1 Preview. Level 3 is agents, and that's systems that can take actions. And so that, as you know, that's already slowly rolling out. Microsoft, they're the ones that first published agents. Salesforce, for quite a while now, has been talking about agentic software. But in the AI circles that I follow that has a lot of startup activity, lots and lots of startups are working with agents. So it's a growing space for us in the very near future. Level 4 is innovators, which is systems that can aid in invention. And that's an exciting part for me because that's having AI help you cure diseases and solve physics problems that are unsolvable today. Level 5 is organizations, which essentially means AI that can do the work of a company. So you have people like Mark Cuban that say, someday, the first $1 trillion company will be an AI company with 5 people. Well, that's because of this evolution in capabilities by AI. So agents is the big one. The way that I think about it is you're familiar with robotic process automation software, RPA, designed to take mundane tasks and that are repeatable, that require little to no judgment, and then the bot carries out the task. Well, agents are supposed to be like bots, RPA bots as we know them today, but on steroids with some judgment and creativity and flexibility. And you have to give it instructions the way the co-pilot agent is designed as of today. But keep in mind, this is going to continue evolving. So the agents of 3 years from now are going to be far more capable than the agents of today if past is prologue. So this is an interesting challenge for us from a risk management perspective. So how do you manage cybersecurity risk particularly when you have agents in your environment that can do more than just this narrow band of work, that can be potentially compromised to do things beyond its initial instructions? So this is new ground for a lot of us. So I think this is interesting. It's important for us to ask a lot of questions. We have to be curious. Clearly, we don't have a lot of guidance in this space because the guidance tends to greatly lag the innovation. So it's incumbent upon all of us in the audit and risk community to learn about this, not just from the internal audit circles, but to connect with the AI community, to follow their podcasts, their webinars. How are they handling agentic software? So that's an interesting challenge for all of us.
What are and this is a question that I would ask you every single time that you're on here, because I know when I have questions about, hey, I need to take a training on XYZ, I go to you and ask you that. And so I know that there's also going to be, you've mentioned a couple of the resources already, but do you have a handful of go-to resources that you could recommend that are AI community first that people could subscribe to, podcast, et cetera? I know we asked you that same question last time, but because of the way things change, those certainly have changed also in the past. I think we had you on like 9-10 months ago. So any additional resources that you would recommend for people to keep on top of what's going on?
Yes, as it relates to general learning, I would still recommend Coursera as a general rule because you have content of different levels of complexity. If you're completely brand new, you have courses like AI for Everyone, Generative AI for Everyone. There's other options for sure. If you want more technical content that works just the same, I would encourage people to consider things like certifications that are now starting to get developed. So, for example, the IAPP, a privacy organization, sort of the privacy equivalent to the IAO-ISACA, they have a new certification called AI Governance Professional. I took the test and I passed it, and I think the content of the test makes a lot of sense for me as an audit leader. So I would encourage people to look into that and see if that training for that particular program works well for them. So that's a good thing to consider. Podcasts, gosh, there's so many. Which one do I recommend? There's one called Practical AI, which is reasonable and sometimes it gets technical, sometimes not so much, but it's worth a shot to listen to what you get out of it. There is a YouTube channel called Eye on AI that's not excessively technical. It's actually very good, I think, for beginners. And that's one to pay attention to because they have a good variety of speakers. One that I love, although that it's very heavy on the technical side, is Twiml, This Week in Machine Learning. I think it's now called, rebranded as This Week in AI. That's where I got that episode of the researcher that said, hey, there's this new vulnerability that I'm exploiting with regard to LLMs. So the biggest challenge today isn't the content, is the time. Find a resource that works for you, dedicate some time. But to specifically answer your question, because you said, Julio, which one is your favorite? My favorite in terms of learning from a course perspective is a deep learning.ai, because they seem to be in the leading edge. So whenever I talk to you about learning on agentic software and how companies are building agents within their application, I'm picking up a lot of that from deep learning.ai.
And I like the daily dopamine hit of what's going on. So like if you just search for AI newsletters or something like that. Like I like newsletters, and I have a tool that takes every newsletter and puts it into one folder. And so I'm not just like constantly getting bombarded. So I can just go in once a day, scroll through and go, yep, let me click on that one, 30 seconds. Okay, I see what's going on. Or take a deeper dive. And then the other thing, and I think it's just because there are so many podcasts and resources that there's almost this FOMO of picking the right one. And so largely what I'll do, especially with podcasts, is just say, hey, Alexa, play a podcast on AI. And it, for the most part, I don't know how it determines which one, but we'll say randomly. Although I feel like in talking to you, we could go, well, technically it's not random because of X, Y, Z, and that's not how computers work, and you can't really randomize something. So it's random enough, though. It's random enough that if I say play an AI podcast, it just pulls something up. I listen to that while I'm eating lunch or something like that. So I found those to be extremely helpful for me in the way kind of my brain works. That's how I like to do it, but I'm glad to get your thoughts also.
With that said, because I'm glad you mentioned the newsletter. So I would recommend you guys subscribe to the Neuron. It's a daily newsletter, absolutely amazing, easy to read. And of course, if you come across anything technical nowadays, go to generative AI and make it easier to understand. I mean, we have to get comfortable with the fact that these tools are supplemental to us. They empower us. So at any time I come across something that doesn't make any sense to me, forget Google, go to generative AI, go to Perplexity. It's one of my favorite tools. Go to Perplexity and get output that not only makes sense for you, but refers to the specific source data from which, the source resource from which the data came. So the Neuron is one that I follow every day.
All right. I love to close these with kind of summarizing actionable items that were mentioned during the show. So I think the vendor onboarding piece was a step that pretty much every auditor can take, or at least discuss that amongst the team and see where that makes sense, as well as the resources you gave are always great. Neuron is one that I subscribe to, so I think that is daily. Superhuman AI, I think, is the other one. I prefer that one over Neuron. I think it's just the look and the feel, and that was my first. But it's it's insane to see every single day that they send an email, there's some pretty decent sized discovery or new thing that's going on, new trend, new advances. And so it's
hard to keep up. It's hard to keep up.
It is. It really is. And I thought we were there. I was telling someone this the other day, an AI leader at a large institution. Like, I've been waiting for things to settle down so that we could like dive into, okay, what is RAG? What is Neo4j? What are vector database? Because every day there's just like a new term. And I feel like we're finally settling just enough to where people can kind of catch up and take a breath. With that said, I'll throw it back to you. Any closing words for the audience?
So why don't I do this? I have a couple of quotes that I want to read to the audience, just to end my commentary. And then let's ask ChatGPT for its closing thoughts. Sound good? Okay.
Perfect.
Two interesting quotes that I picked up on recently. Mustafa Suleyman, who is currently working, I believe, at Microsoft, co-founder of DeepMind and Anthropic, or no, not Anthropic, Inflection. He's quoted as saying that today, again, this is a few days ago, today, the most advanced AI consumes 8 trillion words in a single month of training. 8 trillion words in a single month of training. And this is growing exponentially. So imagine a year from now, 3, 5, let that sink in. Second quote from Sam Altman. We all know who he is, the CEO of OpenAI. He said, superintelligence is only a few thousand days away. and will forever change the way we live life. Let that sink in. So this is why I tell everybody, it is absolutely top priority to make this intentional, upskill in AI, grow your abilities, learn the techniques, learn the tools so that you can be relevant, because it's going to hit us faster than we realize. And I say this to you not as just as a guy who is an audit and risk professional. I say this to you as an investor. My literal money is betting on this on the upside. So I see this coming our way. So it's important that we be prepared and be relevant by embracing the tech in a responsible way. So close, let's leverage ChatGPT. And hey, Chat. Hey, you are part of a podcast recording, and it's called the Audit Podcast. The audience is comprised of internal auditors, risk managers, business leaders, and anybody with curiosity. And at the end of each episode, the host always asks the guest for advice that you would leave with the audience. So I want you to give advice to the audience, but I want your advice to be within the context of the future of AI. Can you do that for me?
Absolutely. Here's my advice. Stay curious and adaptable. AI is reshaping our world, and to thrive, we must understand its impact on our industries and roles. Embrace lifelong learning and be proactive in AI responsibly in your work. This way, you'll not only keep up, but also help shape the future.
Hey everyone, thank you very much for listening to this episode of the Audit Podcast. Whatever platform you're listening on right now, I'm sure there's a subscribe button somewhere, so please hit the subscribe button there. If you're listening through iTunes or Spotify, feel free to go give us that 5-star rating. It only took me about 16 seconds to give myself a 5-star review, and it really helps to get future guests to come on the show, so we'd really appreciate that. Lastly, be sure to check out the show notes and follow us on all our social media channels on Instagram, on LinkedIn, and on TikTok. Also, if interested, please sign up for our weekly newsletter from the Audit Podcast. Thank you all. Have a great one.